So this video is about city leaders who sue an owner of a crime-plagued apartment building, and this is located in South Los Angeles. And so I'm a resident of South Los Angeles, and so I have driven past this very building that they're referring to, and it is bad. And it's, I'm afraid, not the only building that has a problem with crime, and they are finally acknowledging that there is a huge crime wave here in South LA. And so I wanted to kind of elaborate on some of what is going on here. Um, so it says LA city leaders, they sue owner of crime-plagued apartment building. And so this is South Los Angeles, and this was December the 23rd that this article actually came out. So it says LA city leaders are turning to the courts now to help stem the city's recent crime wave. So on Wednesday, City Attorney Mike Feuer filed a nuisance lawsuit against the company that owns a crime-plagued apartment building in South Los Angeles. And so this is not the only building that has an issue with crime, but I'm familiar with this one because I have driven past it and I am familiar with the Santee High School and the Trinity Recreation Center. So it says it's a 16-unit building at 501 East 23rd Street, and it's less than 500 feet from Santee High and the Trinity Recreation Center. So this is referring to this particular building. But I want to say and add that this is not the only building that has an issue with crime. And I will elaborate on that after this article, which is very short. It's actually, this is the whole article. So it says that the lawsuit also, it targets one of its tenants that is in the building. And this one tenant is from the Primera Flats gang. So Feuer, who is running the LA City Mayor, says that the alleged gang member, whom they are trying to evict right now, he is currently in jail. He helped turn the building into a gang hangout. And so the city's lawsuit is seeking to have this particular tenant evicted. And so let me tell you what happens with these buildings. So I'm going to elaborate. South LA does have a crime wave. They are absolutely correct. So there's a couple of things, or more than a couple of things, that are playing here, that are playing out here. So what has happened here in South LA? So we're still going through this pandemic. So a lot of people have lost jobs. There are some people that are on different sides of the fence in terms of their politics, having to do with whether they're going to get vaccinated, the mandates. Then you have a lot of people that live in these neighborhoods that happen to be essential workers, and they've had issues with pay, not being enough to pay the rent. These apartments are priced, or they want market rate rent. They tend to want like $2,000 or $3,000 or more sometimes for these units. And so what happens is they don't screen the tenants well. A lot of times people will come to this side of town, South LA, the Vermont corridor, or anywhere in that vicinity of this particular building that they're referring to on the east side of South LA. And they will find buildings that don't have a manager, because that is how you can commit these crimes and move people in and do a lot of things under the radar because nobody's attending to the buildings. So there's a lot of car break-ins, there's a lot of violence, there's like gangs, there's a lot of unsavory tenants. They may not be necessarily in a gang, they might be affiliated with a gang, or they're just violent people. And they have a history. So they'll use alias names, they'll use a friend's name to get into these apartments because they don't know where else they can stay. They've been kicked out of other places because of their behavior, of how they carry out their life. You know, if they're in a gang, then they have more people coming around, hanging around with that activity. Or if they're violent, then they, wreak havoc in that building, and then they threaten the other tenants, make them feel unsafe to live there. First things first, when people move in those buildings that don't have any manager or anybody looking or monitoring what's going on or checking up, they like to move in those buildings because all they have to do is wave some cash to the people that are management company. They just kind of like slide them on in to these buildings. And so the people that live there, they create an atmosphere of fear. So they bully, they harass, they will threaten. They'll even try to threaten violence to get you to be submissive to their behavior because they don't want you to call the police so that they can carry out their activities, such as this building has gone through. And so that is what happens in South LA, and there is a crime wave. We also have a huge issue with around the Vermont corridor or Vermont Westmount area. You'll have RVs. A lot of those people, sometimes you'll see fighting, people threatening one another, or they're hanging out by the liquor store around here, and they're up all times of the night, and then you have a lot of car break-ins. So these buildings don't have a lot of security. If they did have security, it was maybe in the beginning before the start of the pandemic. I'm referring to one particular building where a property management company manages. There's several property management companies. There's 401k Realty. There's Los Angeles Property Management Group. There's Kingston Management Group. There's Golden Bee Management Property Management. There's different management companies, and their whole thing is to just manage away from the property. They just fix, repair, and move people in. And their thing is to tell the tenants to call the police, law enforcement. They don't really want to deal with the crime that's going on firsthand. And so the owner just collects the rent or the money from these property management companies, and that's all they deal with is the money end of it. They operate it like a business rather than be concerned about the safety of people's lives and the kids and the working class people that are there that are not causing problems. They pretty much don't have a good screening system, and they let people move in who might be using an alias name. As long as you have the money, as long as you're going to pay the rent, you could be a notorious gang a crime lord or gang member. If they, it could be dirty money. All they're concerned about is getting the rent. That's it. You could have stole money from a bank. They'll accept it as long as they're getting it some form, shape, form, or fashion. Um, and so that's the way these buildings are run. And I can attest to what's going on here. And this video is also to alert and awaken these city leaders about the crime wave that has pretty much plagued South Los Angeles, and to the point to where the property is being treated like a business. It is not being treated like a community, so to speak. And so a lot of times too, what comes into play is racism, a structural racism that ignores the fact that the lives of people of color matter at all in these communities. And so it is not about the people, it is about the money, and it is about running their businesses and operating just like as if we don't care. All we want is the rent. We want market rate rent. And if you don't have it, then we're kicking you out. I bet these areas have a high degree of evictions. And because if you're just a month late, If you don't qualify for some kind of relief program and you can't figure out how to come up with the money, they will hound you and hound you and hound you until they get what they want, provided that you still are living in a place that is crime infested, and if something breaks down, they almost want to blame you for the breakdown because they're trying to save a buck. And so they're more concerned about the rent than people's lives. And so that's the way this has been run here. And it had seemed like it has escalated since the pandemic started. And I've noticed it, and it's gotten worse. And so, having said that, I'm going to let this end at some point, but I just wanted to let you know that this is not the first building or the only building that has an issue with the crime wave here in South Los Angeles. We have a lot of unsavory characters. Not necessarily all of them are in gangs, but some are either affiliated with, or they're in other types of criminal element, or they have a history of being violent towards neighbors. And so we've had that. We've had where I'm referring to, we had 4 units that were vacated primarily because they found out that the people were using fictitious names at the very last moment. The only reason why they actually did any screening was after the fact, when they didn't receive the rent from these tenants. So sometimes what happens is they'll get people that'll plop a wad of cash down, but they don't continue to maintain the rent. And those people become squatters, and so they stay in the apartments for as long as they can until they have to go, and they'll stay like a year or more, as long as they can pull it off until they finally have to leave the property. And so that has happened a lot too, where squatters will come to these areas, and they come to these neighborhoods because they know that there's no property manager and nobody's checking for their activity. And by the time they do, it's all done and said. They've probably spent maybe more than 2 years, and they've lived there rent free and created havoc in these apartments. And so I thought I should mention that because this is just yet but one of the many issues that are happening in South Los Angeles.